7 September 1965. Actually, it started off before that.
You have to go a little bit closer, sir.
All right.
Yeah, it's on.
Oh. It started a little bit before that, how I managed to get into that. Prior to the war, I was sent down to Sulur to pick up the last Hunter that had been in storage, a brand new Hunter. So I did the air test on that, and it was around about August, July, August, when the monsoons were in full force. The Bay Bengal, you'd always have a low pressure area there, and you'd have storms every afternoon. So I was told, we could have flown back direct from Sulur straight across to Kalaikunda. I was told, you skirt around, you go to Pune. From Pune, you go to Kanpur, and Kanpur, come into Kalaikunda. And I landed up at Pune. I'm diverging quite a bit, actually. I met a lot of my course mates out there who were flying Vampires. And I landed up there on a Friday afternoon. So the moment I landed up there, they said, Cookie, you're not going straight away. You're going to spend the weekend with us. So I had to find something wrong with my aircraft. And I said, my DME, just as measuring equipment, was not working. So I spent the weekend with the boys. And come the Monday morning, as I was taxiing out, got to the takeoff point, I was sent back by the guys who checked your tires and things like that. They said, go back, you got a severe tear on your tire. So I had to come back. At that stage, there used to be a Hunter squadron in Pune, which had been sent up north. 17 squadron used to be there, and then also 37. 37 was sent up to Jorat, if I remember correctly. And there were little or no Hunter spares left in Pune. So I had to wait for a packet to come along with a spare wheel from Kalaikunda. In the meantime, the war clouds were building up, and the transport aircraft were being used to take supplies to the army up in the front areas. So I ended up staying in Pune for about 10 days, at which time all these youngsters who were with me, like myself, and training together, we had a wonderful time. Among them were 3 of my course mates who happened to have got killed in that the vampire attack on Shamb. You know, there was a 4 aircraft led by a fellow called Bhagwar, who I knew very well. V.M. Joshi, who was my co-pupil. Another guy called Bharadwaj, Satish Bharadwaj, we used to call him Horsey Bharadwaj, because he had a face like a horse. And another one of my course mates, a fellow called Bo Patak. These 4 boys were shot down. Patak survived, he was taken POW. But when I heard about this, I had this rage in my heart, because I was drinking and partying with these guys just a week before that. And I carried this sort of rage into my thing at Kalaikunda. I won't tell you about how I eventually got back to Kalaikunda, because when I took off from Pune, I asked, the weather was bad. We had low cloud and cloud cover right up to about 40,000 feet. So I had to fly through cloud on instruments to above 40,000 feet. So I asked permission to set course over the airfield, which meant I'd have to do a turn and come right across the airfield. I did that because we had a lot of friends, girlfriends, etc. in town. So I beat up town and came over the airfield at about 480 odd knots, a hell of a racket, and set course. After a couple of minutes, the flying control asked me, what was your speed? I said I was at my climbing speed. And the station commander, who happened to be a guy called Ronnie Engineer, he said, come back immediately. So I switched the RT channel to something else and said, I can't hear you, and I just kept going. So while I was flying in cloud, I said, I'm not going to land in Kanpur, I'll go to Delhi, where my mother was. So I changed course and landed up in Palam, totally unannounced. And when I landed up there, the OC flying at Palam was a gentleman called Wing Commander Percy Harrington. And he said, what the hell are you doing here? I said, well, I'm on my way back to Kalaikunda, sir. He said, well, there are no hunters here in Parliament because they just moved up the previous week to Hinder. He says, take your aircraft and go across straight away. So I said, so I can't. My aircraft is unserviceable. My good old DME was not working again. So he insisted. I said, sir, if you want me to fly an unserviceable aircraft, I want the order in writing. So he went off in his Jeep in a huff. So I told the flight sergeant, I says, flight, just get it needed a little valve or whatever, just get the damn thing, because I know you had the spares, so, and have the aircraft prepared. I'll come tomorrow morning at 5:30. So I just got in a taxi, went home at my mother, because I knew something was going to happen. I wanted to see her before the war. Came back early the next morning. Before anybody could come there, I got quick met clearance and landed at Kalaikunda. But of course, the word had got there, and the CEO was waiting for me. He says, Cookie, you're in trouble. So as a punishment, they sent me off to Kanpur to go air test another 2 aircraft and bring them back. So I took young Mumgain along with me. We did the air test and came back together. In the meantime, everybody had been paired off. You know, we had number 1, number 2. I was allocated to do air defense mainly because I was in dogfights. I would get the better of everybody, so they said I would be doing that role. So my regular number 2 was allocated to someone else, so I had Mumgain with me. So Mumgain was my number 2. Come 7th September morning, in the meantime, the war had started in the west. Keeler had shot down his first Sabre. A couple of other guys had shot down Sabres, and a couple of hunters had been shot down as well. And there was a lot of panic that the Sabre was a super aircraft, and I knew from our thing that the Sabre was a good aircraft, but we had a number of advantages with the Hunter, namely the fact that we carried 10,000 pounds of thrust compared to their engines, which are 5,900. And you have to bear that in mind. So 7th of September, the commanding officer of the squadron, Wing Commander LaFontaine, they decided to do a sweep over over Dhaka, and fly at trail height. So the Pakistanis would see the trails, they'd come up and have a dogfight, they'd shoot them down, they'd come back and land at Dum Dum. I told Winko, I said, sir, that is pretty stupid. He said, well, we need to strike them, but we don't know where they are. We don't know whether they were at Tezgaon, which was the main airfield, or Kurmitola. So we didn't have that intelligence, but they had complete intelligence on us because during that period, in the early 60s, we used to have these American pilots come in from the Vietnam or from Thailand, and their maps on the area were much far superior to what we had. They had the latest maps. So I dare say the Pakistanis had that information as well. And anyway, so I was supposed to cover LaFontaine's 4 aircraft, and they came to land at Dum Dum. They took off early that morning, and my secondary job was 4 Vampires were loaded up with bombs and rockets, and they're supposed to take out the flank control tower at Jessore, and there was supposed to be a small radar unit there, and they're supposed to knock that out as well. LaFontaine all taxied out around about 4:45 in the morning, and about 10 minutes later, we started taxiing out, Mumgain and myself. And as we were taxiing past, Mumgain calls out to me, he says, Cookie, the Vampires are still on the ground. They should have gone up earlier because they are slower, and it was my job to give them air cover while they attacked Jessore. So I said, doesn't matter. I said, we will do our bit. We have a certain time on targets, we'll go there. They may come up there. So we went up over Jessore, and we were orbiting for about 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And then our fuel came down. I said, okay, those guys should be back. I got in touch with LaFontaine. He said, we're coming to land. So I covered their landing, and we landed. In the meantime, what had happened? The Pakistanis came low level and hit Kalaikunda. These 4 Vampires, shiny silver aircraft, loaded up with bombs and drop tanks, they were all destroyed, as were 2 Canberras. Pete Wilson, okay. Talking about Pete Wilson, that morning as I took off, there was low cloud, about 500-foot ceiling, broken stratus, and there are drizzle patches here and there. As we took off, we turned right. We took off on runway 35, heading north, and then turned right, 070, to head towards the place we were going. And as we did that, I saw this aircraft coming in low, under the cloud cover. So I called up to tower, I said, contact. And I went in, straight away into attack this aircraft. I got in there, and then I recognized it had the offset cockpit, and I said that's one of ours, because the Pakistanis had the B-57, which had a central cockpit. So that turned out to be Pete Wilson. So I always told Pete, I said, you're lucky. I wasn't trigger happy. Anyway, they landed, but that aircraft got refueled, rebombed, and they were destroyed by the Pakis who came along there with their... They said originally there were 6 aircraft, but in actual fact they had 5 aircraft. 3 doing the attacking and 2 giving top cover. We landed up in Dum Dum, and there's absolute pandemonium. Nobody knew what was happening. This Kalaikunda being hit. I think a few men had been killed out there as well. My job was air defense, so I came back and landed. All we had that morning was my bearer had brought me a cup of tea at what, 3:30, 4 o'clock. I'm giving you a very lengthy one, but anyway. So I had a cup of tea, landed up in Dum Dum. The breakfast truck had not arrived. So we were a bit hungry and all that. And while we was waiting around, the aircraft was refueled quickly, and we got a scramble order. And since I was air defense, up again I went with my number 2. We were vectored to an area about 40 or 50 miles north of Dum Dum, just inside our border. There were 2 Pakistani aircraft on their side of the border, orbiting at 20, 25,000 feet. And we were told to stick around our side. If they cross the border, which is the little river out there, engage. We never saw them, but the radar guys had us under control. He said, okay, they've gone. So we came back and landed. In the meantime, the breakfast truck had come and gone. And because of all the panic that had happened out there in Kalaikunda, nobody kept any breakfast for us. And I was ravenous at this stage. And I saw an airman who had a mug of chai with him, so I grabbed it, juta or no juta, I drank that. And another young airman had a packet of biscuits. So I grabbed him, I said, I want a couple of biscuits, I grabbed a couple of biscuits and shoved them on my mouth. And while that was all happening, another scramble. Same thing. Sent up north, 40 or 50 miles north of Dum Dum, 25,000 feet. And I said, this is unusual. These guys are tying us out. But we hung around there, and sure enough, they came on the second raid. Unfortunately, our little SU unit that we had in Kalaikunda, which is the next World War II relic, a portable sort of radar thing, it never worked really, but this time it just gave one blip. And the guy who's in charge of it was my ex-instructor, Mama Sani. So he called up straight away, and there were 2 hunters at Kalaikunda on ORP. He gave the scramble order for them. And in the meantime, Rampur Hut, which was the SU that was covering me, which was about 130 miles north of Kalaikunda, they told me, he said, look, Kalaikunda's under attack. Can you make it? I said, yep. Check my fuel, check number 2's fuel. We had enough. So we came rushing in. We came around about going about 0.9, 0.95 Mach, heading back to Kalaikunda. I asked the SU, I said, give me pigeons back to base. He said, 240, you're 120 nautical miles away. So we started heading off as fast as we could. During this time, my number 2 was lagging behind me very much, and I lost sight of him. And I told him, come on, keep up with me. He did not keep up, and he would not answer me. So I was getting a bit angry, so I told the SU, I said, where is this guy? He said, about 3 miles behind you. So I told him, you better come up here, as I'll get them to vector me onto you, and I'll take care of you. So he calls up and says, Cookie, I'm scared. So I said, look, so am I scared, but they're killing people on our base. They've destroyed our aircraft. They're attacking again. It's our job. Let's go and do it. So I said, we've been through all of these exercises during training, dogfights. I said, just keep that in mind and keep a clear head. So as we were approaching Kalaikunda, we were now below 4,000 or 5,000 feet. We lost radio contact with the SU. We called up Kalaikunda. Nobody answered. We changed the relay frequency. So, and I could see these big black billows of smoke where they hit the things. And then I could see these shapes of these aircraft doing their attacks. So I got quite excited. I said, okay, look, I'll take these three, you take the other ones. So rather than having tag along as my number two as a sacrificial lamb, I split the pair. And that saved his life and also my life, really. So I got involved in these guys. The first guy was in a dive, firing at a target. The other guy who was coming after him obviously saw me, and he gave this guy a warning. He pulled away very steep, very sharp. And I tried to get my gun sight on him, but I was going excessively fast. I had been about 500, 550 knots. So the hunter, I pulled back, tried to get it up. They had a quick shot, but I missed, and I went zooming past him. So he reverses on me immediately. So I was in front of him, but I had the extra speed, so I zoomed up, inverted my aircraft, and watched him. He jettisoned his drop tanks. So I said, oh, these fellows mean business, because without his long-range tanks, he's going to have difficulty getting back home. Anyway, I said, I'm over my base, so I jettisoned my drop tanks. Good enough for you, good enough for me. And the Hunter, all of you who've flown the Hunter, without drop tanks, as I say, it's a different kind of an animal. It's a beautiful aircraft to fly. So I had no trouble outmaneuvering this guy. He could outturn me, but I'd make use of my speed and height. Eventually got down, and their tactics were very much by the book. Being trained by the Americans, everything they do is by the book. And afterward I said, oh geez, I know exactly what he's doing. I knew what verse and chapter basically he was using from AP 1 to 9. So I was able to preempt him, and they would run away very low. They'd dive down when their speed would wash off. Oh, can I put that there? When you do these scissor maneuvers, he would turn inside me, but his speed would wash off very quickly, and he'd have to dive down to build up his speed. And when he'd do that, I'd pull up and then follow him down again, and he'd pull out very sharply above the ground, hoping that I would go into the ground. So I knew exactly what he was on about. Eventually, he was trying to run away at about 20, 30 feet off the ground, and I got him in my gun sight. How I did not kill myself, God alone knows, because I only wanted to keep my gun sight on this guy, so I kept my gun sight on him, fired, and hit him. Of course, while I was doing that, my wingtip was actually hitting the scrub. And I didn't know, because when the gun was firing off four cannons, there's quite a bit of recoil. You could feel it. And I could not help flying through the fireball that emerged from this guy. And I knew that somebody else had warned him. That's why he's trying to run off as fast as he could. So I knew somebody else was there. So I pulled up, and yes, there's another guy coming up behind me. So I pulled up hard, and this is the guy we had a very long dogfight. He would get behind me, and I'd pull up, and we'd do the scissors maneuvers. And we were so close. In fact, I always thought I'd be able to hit him off with one of my wingtip, or even use my air brake to knock him down. When we were so close, we could see each other's faces. He had a beautiful white helmet, and so did I. And I had my pet name on my helmet, and he had his name, Afsal, or whatever it was. So eventually, I got behind him. He goes into this dive, and I'm firing at him, and nothing much is happening. I could see I was hitting him. I knew I was hitting him, but nothing much was happening, because at this stage, my aircraft had not been loaded up with the proper amount of ammunition. We carry in the Hunter, as you know, 125 rounds per gun. You've got 4 guns. You're firing at a rate of 100 rounds per second. So the first second's worth of firing I had was high explosive rounds, and the balance were practice ball ammunition. So you can imagine something this size, just a lump of steel being thrown at you. As I said, it's like throwing a cricket ball at the aircraft. You're denting him or knocking off the odd panel, but that fellow got away. He had some fuel stream out from him. He ran off. And I didn't have a chance to sort of chase him, because another guy was after me. So the same thing went up again and again. And so who's doing the painting of me in the... Okay.
Dave Gohen.
Okay. Gohen's done one already. So this other guy came at me, and he pulled up the steep wing over. I followed him. I had a shot. I missed him. Then he goes into a dive with him going vertically down, and I'm going there, and I'm firing at him and saying, why the hell is he not being hit? He pulled out of the dive, and I was quite mesmerized. I was wondering why the hell this is not happening. But I realized the ground was coming up very fast, so I pulled back the stick with my finger still on the trigger, and during that time, I just burnt up all my ammunition. And that was gone. I nearly hit the ground. I was very, very shaken at this stage. And I got my equipment back, turned around towards the airfield, and that is when I saw my number 2 in trouble. He was doing a fairly leisurely turn, about 1,500 feet above ground. He would have been about 300, 350 knots. Lovely. And there's a Sabre behind it about 1,500 yards away, closing in. So I gave him a warning. I said, look, do a hard turn left, hard turn port. He said, what's that? I said, a hard turn port. So he did a hard turn port, and I engaged this guy. The moment I engaged him, he broke off from Mumbai. And same thing once again, he tried to shake me off. And at this stage, the hunter was light. I could do anything that the fella wanted to do. He started doing aerobatics, low-level aerobatics, right over our flying control tower. Loops, barrel rolls, and I had no trouble sticking with him. And while I was doing this, I called up Mumbai and I said, where are you? I said, I'm behind this guy, come and take over and shoot him. He never answered me. So I thought that he'd been shot and killed. So I fiddled with my gun selector switch, hoping that I'd get a couple of rounds left somewhere or the other. I closed them, had a shot, but only the camera worked. Then while I was doing that, I put my head down to the back of the cockpit, there were a couple of circuit breakers. I made sure that they were in, closed them even closer, had a shot, nothing. So I called up the control tower. I said, what's happened? Nobody answered me. And this fellow started heading back towards East Pakistan. So I suddenly looked at my fuel. I said, oh my God, I got my bingo lights. Normally when the bingo lights are low, initially they flash, and that catches your eye. But that had happened a long time ago. But because I was so bothered about the actual maneuvers, when you got low fuel, the bingo lights stay on all the time. And they were there, and I said, oh my God, I've got about 200 odd pounds of fuel left. I thought I'd land at Kalaikunda. Unfortunately, that was when I noticed all the flak bursting up around me. Our own anti-aircraft fellows had got trigger happy and they were firing at me. I called up control tower. I said, what they had to tell them to stop. Nobody answered because everybody had abandoned their post. So I zoomed up to get out of their range. I got up to about 5,000 feet. The moment I got to 5,000 feet, I had radio contact with the SU 130 miles away. So I said, this is what's happened. I've been in the fight. Then I looked around and I saw that my wingtip had been shattered and the pitot tube had bent up by 90 degrees, which meant that I didn't know what speed I was flying. So I said, look, I'm critically short of fuel. I'm heading towards Dum Dum. Get somebody to scramble from there and shepherd me in. He said, so the control knew me. He said, Cookie, don't worry, we'll do it. So I started heading off towards Dum Dum, throttle back, trying to preserve the fuel as much as I could. And I called up Dum Dum. I said, on their international channel, I said, I'm coming for emergency landing. He said, negative, you can't land here. There's a Pan American aircraft on finals. And I could see the Pan American Boeing 707 in the distance. So I said, no, I'm not going to take any chances. I just got my nose down, put the undercarriage down, and forced the aircraft onto the runway. Fortunately, I did a very smooth landing because I was at excessive speed. And if you try and land a Hunter at excessive speed, it balloons up. So I got it under control. I deployed the tail parachute, got the speed down, and turned off the runway. The Pan American guy in the meantime had to go around. He must have been cursing me, but I couldn't give a damn. And as I turned off the runway, I jettisoned the tail chute and throttled back. As I throttled back, the engine cut out. And I kept rolling, 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 and stopped about 800 meters or so short of where I was supposed to have gone. And that was when all the men come running up towards me and saying, so why did you stop here? I said, go and get me a damn tractor. He said, so he got no tractor to get me back where I should have gone. And then they got excited. They saw that the gun ports were blackened. And the one fellow says, oh my God, he's got no drop tanks. His drop tanks were gone. Then they realized that I'd been in a fight. The flight sergeant looks at the aircraft. He sees the wingtip shattered. The pylons where the drop tanks were, there were twigs in there. So very seriously he tells me, he says, sir, I've got to report you for low flying. So I said, Chiefy, I said, just get me a damn ladder and get me up this thing. He says, there's no ladder. Well, there's one Tagraj gentleman by the name of Corporal Basin, who is an amateur wrestler, big burly guy. He says, sir, jump, I'll catch you. So I jumped and Basin grabbed hold of me before I hit the ground. Of course, I made the ejection seat safe before I did that. So that was that.
Thank you so much.